All right. Everybody feel good? Hello. Welcome to the College of Fine Arts. I am Jan Ryan, and I'm Executive Director of Entrepreneurship and Innovation here at the College of Fine Arts. And welcome to our Pathways to Entrepreneurship series. This is our signature speaker series for creative leaders and entrepreneurs that are really changing the world. And this is our first one this fall. This is actually a very diverse audience today. We've got creatives and artists and business people and some that are just trying to figure it out, and we've got community partners and people that are interested from the community. One of the things that I'm kind of impressed by is that we all actually have something very much in common, even as diverse as we are here tonight. And I think it's really about a value, a personal value, or a desire, a longing to give back. And I think that's why every one of us is here for this session tonight, to hear Dan and Lisa, and I'm going to introduce them in just a minute. But that ability to give back and to actually think whether is it truly possible to have meaning and purpose combined with profit and paying the bills and getting things done. Is that actually real and realistic? I know our students that I work alongside, and I teach creative entrepreneurship and women in entrepreneurship here at the college, and I often hear our students, in fact, an overwhelming majority of our students want to change the world. They want to give back. They want to have impact. And what I see too often is that this amazing drive, you know, when they start getting closer and closer to graduation, it gets a little bit tricky, because now suddenly they're pressed and they're trying to think, is this impractical to think that I actually could have impact in my life and have significance as well as just getting a job or just having a job or thinking about it as a job. So that's why we're here, guys. We're here to have a conversation really about the art of combining social purpose with profit. And to do that, I'm going to bring them on stage in just a minute. Dan and Lisa Graham are what I would call a pretty terrific duo, maybe a power couple in the era of impact and innovations around impact. And they're going to share a little bit about their experiences, and they're going to be helping us understand some tips and tricks. So I want you to think about what kind of questions that you can ask to be a part of that in the Q&A. And I think I need my clicker to go forward. So if somebody can hit the forward button, I would be most appreciative. So let me say just a couple of words about the new Center for Creative Entrepreneurship. Some of you know we actually introduced a couple of years ago an entrepreneurship program in the College of Fine Arts, not knowing really what we would expect to find. And it's just been so gratifying and rewarding. The results, the different things that have happened over the last couple of years as we've incubated this made us really understand that we need to go forward, we need to grow this and expand the impact of it. And we've created an entity of the Center of Creative Entrepreneurship. And we have some programming that I want to review quickly with you before we start our program, and if you can go forward. We have, beyond the speaker series, we obviously do have curricular and co-curricular, so we have the classes I was talking about, but we have upcoming is Ideas Lab. And the Ideas Lab is starting September 30th. For those of you that are students and you have ideas and you don't quite know what to do with them, but you really want to nurture them and develop them and maybe meet with mentors and come and be inspired, this is the kind of thing that is going to be student-led, but it's going to be created and supported by faculty and community mentors. So we're going to be meeting September the 30th, starting weekly, Mondays from 5 to 6. Go downstairs to the lounge area, and that's where we'll meet every Monday. So remember that one if you're interested. We are also, November 1st through the 3rd, going to do our first ever 3-day startup for creatives. How many of you have ever gone through a 3-day startup or know what I'm talking about with 3-day startups? So 3-day startup is a lot of fun, and we've never done one on the creative side, but it's a completely facilitated weekend, really, of simulating and running a company. And basically you come together and you pick teams and you have an idea that you pick, and then basically you go out and you do everything you would do as an entrepreneur. You don't need any experience to come join this. It's always fun. When you interview people that are leaving, they say, now I sort of get it. I understand what it means to launch a company, and I think I actually I could do this. This is much more accessible to me. So we're going to do our first creative 3-day startup, first through the third, and then Creative Cup. After we've done all of the ideation and now we've got the 3-day startup, we're actually going to have a pitch event in COFA, our first ever pitch event, and there will be prize money for ideas that are the winning ideas, you and your team, so that you could actually have seed funding. Okay? So we're going to have a lot of fun. I hope you'll join us, and I think it's time. Let's dig into our talk tonight. So Dan and Lisa, why don't you come join me on stage? So let me give you a few words about Dan and Lisa Graham. Get too close to the mic over here. Both Dan and Lisa are native Austinites. They're here, Texas, Austin. They both are also from UT alums. Both are very motivated, which is very odd that both of them would be this way before they married, from what I understand, motivated by this powerful intersection between social innovation and entrepreneurship. So both of you sort of have this DNA around philanthropy, and perhaps even some of the reason why it brought you together. You've co-founded a company called Notley Ventures, and I believe that was named after the abbey that you were married in. Am I correct in that?
Yeah.
Near Oxford?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. It's a company that created a new level of energy and growth and awareness around impact-based businesses here in Austin. And it's also now a playbook that they can take out nationally. So if you've ever heard of Notley, you're thinking of things like Philanthropy and Center of Social Innovation, and we're going to talk about some of these innovations a little bit later tonight. Back in 2005, though, Dan, who was the original entrepreneur here of the two, Dan was a student at UT. So just like you sitting in your chair, Dan was out there and a couple of buddies, and he actually launched a company called Build-A-Sign, and very easily understanding what you do in Build-A-Sign. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But Build-A-Sign was ultimately acquired by Vistaprint in 2018 for $280 million. He was recognized along the way as CEO of the Year from ABJ, Austinite of the Year by Austin Under 40, serves on the boards of the Long Center, Austin Community Foundation, and others. Lisa is also an alum of UT. She graduated from LBJ, the School of LBJ, Public Affairs. And as I mentioned, she shares the same philanthropy DNA. She founded a group that matched pro bono services with nonprofits. She's worked with political campaigns, consulted with school districts, and been really involved in advocacy for education. She's also very active in the community and in Austin's community boards, such as the board of directors for Annie's List, the Friends of the Children. She is on the advisory board for Houston-Tillotson School of Business and Technology, and they have 3 beautiful young daughters. So I don't think I'd want to be in on the juggling that has to happen on their calendars, but this is the background of where we are with Dan and Lisa. So let's when we're thinking about how to start, let's go way back to the very beginning. I want to go back and really see what kind of students you were at UT. Dan, why don't you tell us a little bit about what was going on in your mind back in that time?
Yeah, so can you guys hear me okay? Started out here in undergrad. I was a computer science major and a philosophy major. And as I was getting ready to graduate, knew I wanted to do something that involved kind of interacting with people a little bit more than just kind of a pure coding job. And so I looked at business schools and also at law schools. Ended up enrolling at UT Law and thinking I would kind of go into intellectual property or contracts or patent law or something like that. And so for me, I was very much in the mindset of, okay, I'm here in school to get a particular type of education that will allow me to go get a particular type of, nice paying job, And entrepreneurship, which was sort of going on in the background, was to earn extra beer money on the weekend. Yeah.
So were you guys dating at that time, or?
No,
So
we were not.
So tell us what you were up to, Lisa.
Yeah, so I was, can y'all hear me okay, or is it a little too loud? Okay. So for undergrad, I did communication studies and history here at UT, and my background was in political communication. So I was really interested in policy and political campaigns. So in my mind, I come from a background of educators, and so I always knew education was very important, and I knew I wanted to make the world a better place. I wanted to work in the community, and I always thought I would do that through policy. And so through undergrad, and then actually I ended up going to the LBJ school, and my master's is in public affairs. So that's what I was doing. And we do like to contrast our undergraduate education, because Dan likes to give me a hard time, because my science classes were like Age of Dinosaurs and History of Witchcraft, and Dan's were like 5 different classes on algorithms, so our backgrounds are pretty different. So we were doing very different things, yeah, in undergrad.
So if you both had this desire to give back, was there something early on that actually shaped that? When you think back to your early life and your family, where do you think that came from?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned, my grandmother was an educator. I grew up, my dad, he is an attorney, and he worked at the Capitol. And so when I'd visit my dad, I would go to the Capitol. And so it's funny, because I still walk in that building. I don't know if y'all have been in the Capitol building, but it smells exactly the same as it did in like 1985. And so it's just a lot of memories there. And so just seeing that in action. All the same
people are still there.
All the same people, probably. And so I think for me, just seeing that firsthand, and so that in my mind, it's like, oh, well, that's what people do. This is what they do to affect the community, and that's just what I saw.
And you the same?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, giving back was something that was always part of the plan. Is, make money and give money back. Provide for family first, but then be able to give back whatever wealth was created to others who need it. Both of my parents worked for nonprofit organizations. Growing up, I went to a school that did a lot of service work and volunteering, but I don't think it was like a conscious plan other than just something that I kind of assumed would be part of my life going forward.
So I don't think you actually expected entrepreneurship to hit you when it did you? Tell us a little bit about that process with Build a Sign, and what was it like to take an idea? We have entrepreneurs in the room, and those that are looking at entrepreneurship. What's it like to take an idea and then take it forward?
Yeah, I mean, for us, the development of the idea was really just iterating through a whole bunch of failures. And so we started out, we were doing web development work on the side to, as I mentioned, to kind of earn some extra spending cash. And one of the companies that we were talking to about building out a website was a sign company. And we looked at their business model and saw how inefficient it was, how much money they were spending in the graphic proofing process. And we thought, there are companies and websites out there providing online design tools for things like business cards, but not for signs. What if we built a Photoshop tool that could be embedded on the website, and then you could go out and get new customers from non-geographically specific places. You could turn over the graphic design process, which is really costly, to the customer. And so we built out kind of a working prototype of that and tried to sell that as a piece of software to this printing company that we were quoting. And I think we quoted them $7,000 for the website, and they said it was too expensive. And so we had this thing that we'd spent all this time on. So then we said, okay, well, there's bound to be other sign companies in town. And so we went, and it turns out there's about 150. And we started going door to door to all these different sign shops, trying to find someone who would buy or license our software, and just got rejected every single place we took it, usually because they thought the internet was a fad. Multiple business owners kept calling it the intercom, and usually the graphic design person that we were talking about replacing was like an uncle or a cousin or someone like that. And so it was a really hard sale, and ultimately we ended up launching it online as a proof point to show that it could be used to get revenue. And we spent $500, like all the money we had. It was on Google AdWords. It was gone in 3 seconds, and we got 0 orders. And so we actually tabled the whole thing. And about a month later, we randomly got an order from somewhere in the middle of Illinois and had no idea how they had found us, or even, frankly, that the website worked. And as we were dissecting what had happened, we realized we were doing AdWords completely wrong. And we had just said, show our website to anyone that searches for anything that has the word signs in it. And so Google will actually let you pull up a list of everything that people are actually searching for when they click on you. And it was full of stuff like signs of gonorrhea, signs of the apocalypse, signs of the zodiac. And so we went through and cleaned that up, and suddenly orders started kind of coming in on a more regular basis. And so we quickly had to find someone who could produce that stuff for us. Luckily, we had this huge list of sign companies that had rejected our software. So we went back, found a company that was willing to be the manufacturer. This was back in 2005, and began to outsource to them, and did that for a couple of months until our volume exceeded their capacity. And then at that point, I was finishing my last semester of law school, so I began to drive over to this sign shop every day to yell at them about getting our orders out on time. And the owner just looked at me and said, "We hate your orders. They're like these custom one-off onesie, twosie things. So, we don't know if your volume's going to be here tomorrow. So you might as well go help in the back." So we started going over to this sign shop every day, helping get our orders out, and then going back and cutting them a check for all the free labor we had just done.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so that's kind of how we ended up slowly getting into the business, and then ultimately made the decision, after sleeping and taking shifts in this other guy's shop, to get into
So you literally were sleeping at the shop.
Yeah, some of the printers, they require like constant watching as they're printing. So we would take shifts sort of monitoring all of the different printers in the shop.
So did you all three know you wanted to do this after school, or was this just kind of, you're just randomly continuing something because it begins to work?
No, I was finishing school. Another one of my partners was getting his master's in electrical engineering, and the other two had jobs. And so none of us were doing this full-time. We actually, in January of 2006, when we decided to get our own machine, we kind of had to threaten one of our partners to quit his job and say, if you don't quit, we're going to take away your equity. So he quit his other job, and then we were all full-time. But it wasn't a unanimous decision for us to get into the manufacturing part of the business. We actually voted, and it was 3-1.
So as entrepreneurs, we all have that wish we had known story. What was your wish you had known before you ever got in this type story? And what kind of class do you wish you had taken at UT? If looking back and knowing all the things you were going to go through, what is your wish I'd known item you can share with us?
There are way more instances of, if I had known, I never would have done it, than there are things that I wish I had known. I think part of the fun of being an entrepreneur, and frankly, the reason a lot of entrepreneurs, including myself, are successful is because we sort of fly at the brick wall with the expectation that we should be able to punch through it. And if we had known the odds of actually being able to punch through that brick wall, we might not have charged at it with the same passion that we did. Certainly we had a lot of close calls at the beginning of the business where we almost went out of business because we didn't understand the way that the bank viewed merchant services accounts and taking credit cards online, and we had to learn those things really quickly. Or printers that we purchased without doing the due diligence and trials that we should have, that turned out to be really expensive paperweights when we got them into the shop, and things like that. But I really think that there is some value to that kind of ignorance early on in plowing forward with an idea that you have passionate about.
So when did philanthropy begin to come inside of your company mission, and when did that happen?
Yeah, so all the products that we sold are in really high demand by nonprofits for their walks and races and conferences, and so they're always asking, and nonprofits are very good about asking for stuff for free. And so we would get all these calls for our, asking for a free product. We set up a budget at the beginning, a quarterly amount that we would do free product for, and very quickly, across the country, as word got out, we had this nonprofit program, we got a ton of requests. And so we found ourselves in this position of having to decide what nonprofits we were going to support. And it was a very hard thing to do, to sort of make that decision in a systematic way, getting dozens of these requests every day. And so what we ended up doing was trying something entrepreneurial. We said, well, let's bring in a part-time person and let's tell them that they need to create a tiered sponsorship model. So really large nonprofits that we know have big budgets, let's charge them, maybe we'll give them 10% off, and then all of the money that we make from that nonprofit will go to subsidize the smaller nonprofits that can't afford anything, with the kicker that that person also had to use that revenue to pay for their own salary. And so we kind of had this business model mindset behind the philanthropy that we were doing in terms of funding itself. And that person absolutely crushed it. Within 18 months, we had 8 full-time people focused on philanthropy. We had hundreds of thousands of dollars that we were trying to figure out how to give away. And then that began to fuel a lot of the programming that we launched. And it happened to be leveraging our business in this really interesting kind of micro P&L way, profit and loss kind of business unit within our larger company that was funding our philanthropy. And that was my first real aha moment, I guess, with regards to funding philanthropy in a non-traditional fashion, meaning not where you go ask someone for a donation every single year until they get tired of giving to you, and then you have to find another person to replace that person.
I remember when I'm also an entrepreneur, and at the time, my company had been acquired, and I had launched a company or a nonprofit called Women at Austin. And I remember at that time when we were first starting, we had a need for some signs, just signage, because we had some early panels. And someone said, you really need to talk to Dan Graham, at Build a Sign. And sure enough, one of our people did, and you supported us. And it was so meaningful to us. We'll tell you later why that's kind of a short story for what happened in the end, because Women at Austin now is in the social impact ecosystem of Notley. But it also made everything that we did and what we touched in a need for signs, we sent people to Build a Sign. Because that you cared about us and there was this virtuous circle going on, we sent them to you as well. I have to admit that most companies, and I worked in startups and was a part of startups for many years, most companies that are just getting off the ground would never say, we're in the philanthropy business. And they'd say, someday we'll do that, and someday when we have time to do that. Did you have an agreement with your partners? Did you all feel like, even at the beginning before this took off, that you should have a mission around philanthropy together?
Honestly, it was a little bit more my thing, and the business unit model allowed it to kind of go, to grow on its own steam in a limitless way. As long as it was funding itself, there wasn't kind of a budget impact that had to be agreed on by all of the business partners and owners. And so the business model nature allowed it to really grow wings and fly. And I think also the realization of if a nonprofit was going to spend $5,000 on print products over the course of a year, and we donated that $5,000, then they get their print products covered, but we're out $5,000. But if we could leverage our business resources, then we could give them the same benefit, and it would cost $500. And so we could do that 10 times over for the same cost as donating money and still provide the same monetary value to the nonprofit ecosystem. So there's also this leverage that businesses can get by thinking a little bit more creatively about how they give.
Well, and little did you know, you were discovering and creating some of those innovations that you're using now. You were actually disrupting your industry there, but you were also beginning to understand how you were going to disrupt philanthropy, which I want to get into a little bit more now, since you had a huge success with Build a Sign. Rolling the tapes forward, Lisa, you were now beginning to as you co-founded Notley, to understand not only just how to give back, but how to help others and scale others' impact and how you could help them give back. you surely did not have a playbook for this. Was this a little scary? Tell us a little bit about what those early days of Notley were like, because you were making this up as you went.
Yeah, I would say it was never too scary, and I would say we definitely had a luxury, right? Like we had an influx of capital that we were able to use, and that's a luxury that I think a lot of people who are in startups do not have. Most people don't, and so that was nice to have that freedom. I think what was interesting was, as we started talking to other people about what we were doing and what we wanted to do, we got a lot of really confused looks, and then people would say, well, who else is doing that? And we had nobody to say, oh, well, go look at this group, or we are the Uber of X, right? We couldn't say that. And so I think early on, it was more of a struggle to figure out how do we explain what we're doing to other people to get their buy-in to what we're doing, because what we're doing we think is pretty great.
Were there any mistakes that you can remember that you had to bumble through in order to really find the right way, as you say, iterating through failure? How did that look with Notley?
I mean, I think early on, and I wouldn't call it a failure, but we always kind of say it's a good pivot. I think that our initial structure of how we laid out our company was not the best way to do it, and I think because the idea was we had for-profit. We wanted to work at the intersection of for-profit and nonprofit, and how we originally organized our company was we had a for-profit arm, and we had somebody running that, and he had his own staff, and we had a nonprofit arm, and we had somebody running that, and she had her own staff. And so there was a lot of communication issues. Some people didn't really understand what this arm was doing, and they didn't really get how they were overlapping. And I think the biggest thing that we were able to pivot and do is to bring both of those organizations under one group of management. And so right now, and since that has happened, within about 2 years, we've grown from 4 people to almost 30. And now we've been able to really focus, and people are on the same page, they get it, and now we're able to find great talent who really understands this intersection of for-profit and nonprofit, and it helps us to talk about our mission and to communicate that with people as well.
So your tagline is change the rules and change the world. So in order to change the world, you have to change the rules. Why did the rules need changing in this space and impact?
I think fundamentally the space that we play in is kind of at this intersection of entrepreneurship and traditional philanthropy, kind of looking at how do we take these really gnarly problems that are out there in the world that the community is battling all over the country, all over the world, all over our city, and think about them in the way that an entrepreneur would, which is how do we scale our solution to make the biggest dent possible in attacking this problem, and how do we do that in a way that will be sustainable financially? And that is just very different than the traditional way that we go about tackling community problems, which is much more through a traditional funding route. And so when we talk about changing the rules, like one very simple example is if you were in the business of selling a product and you had a salesperson to go sell that product for you, you could give them typically what you would see is a compensation structure that would have some amount of base pay, an hourly rate or a salary, and then you would incentivize them to go sell that product with a commission. So they'd get a percentage of a sale, or they get a bonus if they sold more than this amount, because you're aligning the company's profit motive with this individual's income motivation. In the nonprofit world, if you try to connect compensation with fundraising in terms of a similar incentive program, they will actually, there are industry organizations like the Association of Fundraising Professionals that will kick you out of their network as doing something that is unethical. And so there are a lot of traditions, there are a lot of laws that we've put in place that make it very difficult for nonprofits to grow and scale in the way that a business would to tackle big problems. Effectively, businesses exist to tackle problems, and nonprofits exist to tackle a very narrow type of problem. And so when we think about these solutions, we're trying to think of all the different ways we might solve that more or less an entrepreneur might think about solving a business problem.
Tell us a little bit about how you're solving the problem of innovation, because nonprofits many times are not able to innovate because their shareholders are their donors and they don't necessarily want to take risks. Tell us a little bit about Philanthropy and what's going on there.
Yeah, so Philanthropitch is a nonprofit, and Notley staffs it. We put it on, it actually originated out of Build a Sign. And what it is it's a fast pitch competition for nonprofit executives. And they get 3 minutes to pitch an idea. They get 3 minutes to answer questions from judges. And all of our judges are local entrepreneurs and business leaders. And so we've actually been doing this in Austin since 2012, 2013, and are now expanding that across the country. So we do it in San Antonio, Columbus, Ohio. We're about to do one in Philadelphia this next year. And the idea there in terms of innovation is, I like to say that we help to provide these executives the freedom to start to think more creatively. And so giving them new lines of revenue is what we try and, I guess, reward in a way or really highlight at Philanthropitch. So we look for nonprofits who are doing earned revenue models, or they have really innovative ways to create a technology to solve a problem in their industry and are marketing that in a really interesting way. And so the idea is, how do you bring these ideas to the entrepreneurial community, but also how do you start to communicate your nonprofit as a business? And I mean, we've really seen too a lot of nonprofits. We had a nonprofit actually pitch in the first ever Philanthropitch. They pitched again 2 years ago, and in that amount of time, they've created an entire software platform through Salesforce. The ED was a keynote at Dreamforce a year or two ago, and have just grown into a huge organization. So.
When they pitched at the first Philanthropitch, they were mentoring about 300 underserved students to help them get into college and then through college. And when they pitched this last time, they were serving 600,000 students. So over that period of time, because they found a couple of different revenue models by looking at their stakeholders and saying who is receiving value from this solution and who's benefiting, they were able to put together some really interesting business models. And we see that that's very possible and not that hard for most organizations to come up with different ideas to go out and pilot and try. One of the hardest parts beyond that is getting someone to fund the pilot.
Exactly. It's interesting, Dan and Lisa are very humble, and they talk about what they're doing in a very humble way, but I just want you to get a sense for the scale of what they're accomplishing in Austin. It was probably over a year ago that I went out to meet with them at their Center for Social Entrepreneurship, or Social Innovation, the Center for Social Innovation. And I had heard about this, I'd seen in the press, but I didn't know where it was, really. I didn't know what it was. And I was driving out, it's in East Austin, and I was utterly lost, and as you can get and occasionally in East Austin, until you know it. Mm-hmm. And I remember coming into this amazing campus, which was just shocking to me, on Springdale, and I was thinking to myself, I'm going to pull over and maybe ask somebody, why I'm lost. Literally, it's a 10-acre, 15-building campus of. Well, I'm going to let you tell us what it is. It is housing nonprofits and social entrepreneurs all over town together in a way that is, I think, going to changing the face of Austin right now. But tell us a little bit about the Center for Social Innovation.
Yeah, it's, that was a really good description. It is,
except we have a Cafe Medici now.
Yeah,
so
now we have a coffee shop
cafes,
and a bar.
Two cafes
So
and a bar.
it's a great place.
Everyone is just coming to this place. It's an amazing real estate venture at this point.
Yeah, and it, I think the Center for Social Innovation was one of the first really big projects that we talked about when we started Notley. So back in 2015, when we were trying to think of what are some what are our BHAGs for, our first year or so, what did it look like? And having a center or a physical space for nonprofits and social impact companies to physically be together was one of them. And so we were able to, work on, the entire complex is also called Springdale General. So if you've heard of that, it's the same location. And we developed the Center for Social Innovation. And like Jan said, it's 160,000 square feet, housing social impact for-profit companies, housing nonprofits. We also have a co-working space that's 10,000 square feet. And then we have artist space, so we have galleries, and we also really,
East Austin Studio Tour was headquartered there this year.
Yeah, and in building the complex over there, we really did go out to the community and say, well, what would you want to see here? What do you need? What do you want in your neighborhood? And so there's a barbershop, there's several restaurants, there's a bar, and there's a tattoo parlor. So we like
There's
to say
there's
it's a
tattoo
great,
parlor.
yeah,
No childcare yet?
no childcare.
The tattoo parlor?
Not at the tattoo parlor.
Bar,
so it's a, yeah.
tattoo parlor, just right next to each other.
So it's a great place to make poor decisions. But no, it's really fun, and it's great to see a lot of folks, and we see a lot of Philanthropitch finalists are there as well, and you actually do see people like walk up to other people's offices and be like, "Can I get 10 minutes of your time?" And it's made a big difference in how a lot of people interact with each other.
Well, what is that like for having all those nonprofits? I can remember so clearly in my years in Austin, nonprofits were so fragmented and many times duplicative in their efforts, didn't even know someone else was still, was involved in that. What's that like to have them all in one place? And I'm assuming, you're 100% occupancy. This is it's continuing to be as popular as it's always been.
Yeah, it's really cool to see us. Especially, it sounds a little cliche, but now that the coffee shop's open, like everyone kind of has a gathering space, so it is a great place to go, and you really do see several nonprofit leaders in there at the same time having meetings. It's really energizing, and it's also been cool to see, especially having the different size office spaces available, right? So you can start at a desk theoretically in the co-working space, and we even have a company that we've been working with called Civitech that works to get people registered to vote, and they started out with like 4 desks in co-working, and they just moved into like a 3,000 square foot office in the center, and at some point they're going to outgrow us, but we love seeing that growth as well within the community.
Awesome. How many artists do you have?
Oh, that's a good question. Quite a few. There's a retail art gallery that rotates, kind of gallery space in the front of the building right next to Cafe Medici. And then there's I think 3 walk-through galleries, but then a bunch of different kind of artists' offices ranging from kind of branding to kind of more purely visual arts.
And Creative Action is housed there as well. They have one of the entire buildings. And so there's just so many great opportunities for how do you then, the kids who get to work with Creative Action, how do you expose them to other artists in the community? Well, there's, 10 of them in the center. So there's a lot of synergies like that as well.
The landscape architect, so a bunch of flavors of design and art are present there.
Yeah.
So I have another couple of questions before I turn it loose for Q&A. One is about culture, because I know culture is at the top of your list in so many things that you do. And Dan, you've said in the past many times, and you have a strong opinion about how a lot of founders don't take it seriously enough and then end up with the wrong people on their early teams. And talk to us a little bit more about your culture at Notley and just in general. How do you think that entrepreneurs need to be very, very careful about who they hire and if they're buying into your value system and if everyone is on the same wavelength in that regard?
Yeah, I think whether an entrepreneur wants to acknowledge culture or not, they are creating one, and they have one, and I think there are functional reasons to think about culture in terms of people feeling like they have a place to speak up and speak out and add value and contribute to the conversation, and making sure that as a group we're not, or an organization's not shutting people down or limiting those kinds of thoughts. Obviously, the innovation really thrives in an environment where ideas clash and people are comfortable sharing and throwing things off the wall. As we have been talking about in my journey, most innovation is the result of a lot of failure, and so you don't get failure in a willingness to fail in a culture that isn't kind of open to that kind of thought and feedback. And so knowing that you're going to have a culture and that culture will be developing around you as you bring people into an organization, it really makes sense to think of that as an active process to engage in, to make sure that that is being shaped in a way that is aligned with the mission and values that you want for your organization. And then making sure that as you're hiring, yes, you want everyone bought into the culture, but you also want to bring in people who are going to add to that culture and help it develop and grow in a way that is not only something that you want, but is something that the existing people at the organization want, and that ultimately is going to fuel whatever your mission is to the greatest extent possible. And it is a hard thing to do because culture is not shaped by whatever you put on the wall. It's shaped by the everyday behaviors of the people who you bring into the team, and that is a hard thing to direct if you're not super intentional about it.
Yeah, I mean, I would say like one of the things that we talk about a lot too is, transparency and trust. And I think that that's something too that we really try and build. And I think that, on occasion it gets tested a little bit. And when we get called out on stuff, it's actually, that kind of reminds me like, okay, we're doing this right because we can now have a conversation. And so that's always really nice. And I think it helps our staff to feel a lot more comfortable to do that. And I think also creating this environment where people feel they can take risks, whether it's just throwing out an idea or acting on it. And we like to say too, on occasion, we've had a few folks where you come into a meeting, they're like, I have this really crazy idea. And a lot of times we're like, that sounds great. Like, tell us how you're gonna do it, so.
What kind of people are you looking for, and what qualities are you looking for when you're hiring at Notley?
Oh, that's a great question. We like a lot of people that we work with. They're very curious. They're very passionate. They really, truly care about the impact, and that's something that we revisit a lot. So with a lot of our programs, we do revisit them regularly and say, is this making the impact that we want it to make? And if not, how do we fix it, or how do we move on so that we're all continuing to do the work that we all signed on to do? And so I think those two things have been really important.
I think mission first, willingness to do things in an unorthodox way. And then certainly we're doing so many things, as you mentioned earlier, and moving so fast that we need people who are able to self-define their job as they go, as opposed to people who are looking for their daily checklist and daily task list, because we just...
Sort of autonomous thinkers.
Yeah, we just don't have time to do that. And there are a lot of organizations that is what they're looking for. But for us, we're looking for some people who can kind of run with things and come up with the right path as they go.
And I always like to say too, like, I always look to hire people that are much better at things than I am. And so I would say I'm very confident that everyone that I'm working with is doing their job better than I would ever even be able to do.
For me, that's really easy.
Well, let's yes, Well, we're almost to questions. You're first. I'm going to ask one more question just to make sure that we've mentioned some of the social impact system or social impact ecosystem players that you have. I want to make sure that people know what's inside of Notley. If you could just talk a little bit about the other things. We talked about Philanthropy and some other things, but talk about Div Inc. and Women in Austin and some of the other things that you're nurturing and growing. Because what they're doing is scaling different nonprofits and impact organizations that need that help. Just as when I was moving to my role here at the university, I didn't have time in my give back to run Women at Austin. And Dan I remember when we were talking and he was saying that's what we do is we scale things, because we had 1,000 women. It was for women entrepreneurs, 1,000 women in the network, and just not enough people to be able to run it. And now they have hired an executive director, and they're feeding fuel into that, and the community is prospering. So tell us a little bit about some of the different organizations that you're helping.
Yeah, so Women at Austin is one of them. That one's been so fun to work on, and the staff gets very involved in that. It's really exciting. Jan created a great organization that was ready to scale and take it to that next level. And so, yeah, we did just hire a CEO about 3 months ago. And so we're providing educational opportunities for women looking to scale their businesses. And then we're going to be working on some other programming to really make that more robust. So that's exciting. Div Inc., you also mentioned, it is an accelerator for women and people of color. And that's been really exciting as well too, because there's a team that's for entrepreneurs, yeah. And there's a team that's already been working on that and building something really great. And so I think we've been able to come in and provide them services that they need so that they can really focus on their accelerator and grow that program and hopefully expand it. I think they're hoping to do that here in the next year or so. We also do, you're gonna have to probably jump in because we have a lot. I'm trying to think what else just right off the top of my head. We do startup games, which is a way for businesses to get together and do some internal team building, and then they come together for a day of like games and fun, and then the money goes to charity. We have a fellows program where we work with young professionals between the ages of, I believe, 23 and 35 who are in the for-profit sector. And we introduce them to a lot of leaders around in the community. And then in their second year of the program, they have a community project that they work on. And whether it's helping with a Notley initiative, or if they have something that they're super passionate about, we throw some of the Notley weight behind them and help to make that a reality.
Yeah, we're helping launch a new research policy think tank. It's a new branch from the Austin Monitor, which is a local media and news publication that follows all the local policy and politics. And we also are launching Naturally Austin, which is a industry nonprofit that's focused on kind of advancing healthy products through the early startup days and journey. And then we do a lot of work kind of more on a project basis with nonprofit organizations that are looking to scale. We've like Black Fret or Easter Seals, College Forward we mentioned, and a bunch of others as well.
Yeah, and then we do educational workshops. So, but with this nonprofit, it's a nonprofit workshop, but with more of what we like to say is a more for-profit or entrepreneurial bent. So we just had one on financing as opposed to fundraising, right? So like, how do you look at your finances and try and sift through those in a way that's a little different than if you're just trying to fundraise a certain amount of money to like kind of meet your goals.
It was really funny because we do these surveys at the end of value you got out of it. And the first time we did one around fundraising, because we approached it very much from a business sort of perspective, it was all 10s and 1-1. And the one was, this is not how nonprofits are supposed to think about fundraising.
Yeah. And
So
like,
we
yes,
like to
we
say
did
we
it
want
right.
all 10s
Yeah.
or 1s. And,
That's funny. And then you also do impact investing and for-profit investing as well. So a lot on your plate. I want to thank you so much for being here and for participating with us and for helping us in our mission at College of Fine Arts within the Center of Creative Entrepreneurship, which is really to help entrepreneurs and think like artists and artists to think like entrepreneurs. And so I hope I can get to know many of you as new friends. Thank you, Lisa and Dan. Can we give them a round of applause? And be safe driving home tonight. Thanks, guys.